Dr. Jos Strengholt, a political historian based in Cairo. Tonight at the Anglican Chaplaincy at the Do Something seminar, you outline religious minority rights in the Arab world. You explained that it is a problematic issue with difficult to define terms. You provided an extensive historical background to illustrate the relationship between the faiths. But firstly, you looked at the Quran, which for Muslims is the source for inspiration and justification on how to relate with minorities and their rights. What was clear from some of the verses was that the Quran discourages relationships with Christians and Jews. Have these scriptures been influential on the relationship between faiths?
Well, obviously, throughout history, people have a tendency to not always follow their religious scriptures. But of course, at times of tension, these were certainly verses, these Quranic verses certainly didn't help create better relationships. I'm not so sure that the Quran had a direct impact on how people relate. I don't think that people read a verse and then say, I have to be nasty against my neighbor. But if you have a neighbor and you have a problem with him, then it is a very easy justification if you read in your holy book that you shouldn't be friends with him. I don't know how these processes work. I'm not a sociologist. But definitely the clear statements in the Quran that Christians and Jews cannot be trusted, that you cannot be friends, are obviously unhelpful.
When exploring early Islamic history, it becomes clear that there was some more freedom as more churches in the Middle East. Muslims used an existing legal framework to treat minorities which were outlined by Christians. Initially, there were cordial relationships which changed as Muslims became a majority, which in turn changed the laws. How were Christians and Jews treated during this time?
You mean in the early period? Well, because there was hardly any mixing of the religions, because the Muslims were such a small minority that Christians hardly saw them. They were in their army camps and they hardly came out. The real aim of the Arabs in the very beginning, when they conquered the Middle East, was not to spread their religion at all. Opposite, they didn't want to spread their religion initially. Their real goal was to extract as much taxation as they could and send it back home to Arabia. Only after a couple of decades they began to realize that it was pretty nice to actually stay there. And then they had the problem that people became Muslims and had to pay less tax than what they previously paid. So there were many times when Muslims didn't want Christians to convert to Islam because it cost too much money. The tax office didn't get enough anymore. So it was a complex time, and well, to generalize is dangerous here.
How does this compare to today? What are the relationships between Christians, Jews, and Muslims like today?
Well, if I simply look at Egypt, we don't have many Jews left, although the feelings in Egypt about Israel are incredibly negative. But Christians and Muslims, well, they mix a little bit in schools, for instance. But the average Christian father and mother tell their children to not mix with Muslim children. And the average Muslim family will tell their kids to not mix with Christian kids. There's a real fear of one another, hatred. For Christians, one of the major issues is that they are scared to death that their precious daughters will fall in love with a Muslim boy. That is a big problem, because then she might want to convert to Islam. In the Middle East, Christianity and Islam have really become tribal issues. So if someone moves from one tribe to the other, it is incredibly painful for all the people involved. And therefore a lot of Christians are very careful to really keep a big distance so that their kids don't fall in love and all that sort of stuff.
You also spoke of the growth of Islamism. While there was an increase of nationalism, there was also an increase in Islamism. How has this influenced the rest of the world?
That's a question. Well, the growth of nationalism was, I think, much more acceptable for the Western world. We could more easily deal with it because nationalists use categories that we easily understand easier. Of course, the nationalism led to an anti-colonialist movement, and we didn't like it, but it was at least understandable. I think we have much more problem with the Islamic movement because that movement is so alien to secularized thinking, that people just find it scary, don't know how to deal with it. The Islamic movement has, of course, also retained part of that nationalism. It's not that nationalism has been done away with and now it is all Islam. But the prime allegiance of people has certainly changed. Most Muslims in the Arab world, if you ask them, what is your allegiance? 40 years ago they would say Egypt or Jordan. Now they will say Islam.
So what is the current state of minority rights in the Arab world?
Legally it is not so bad. In daily life, society makes it often quite hard on Christians. And I think the major problem is not that there are problems every day, but there are problems every few years, big problems. And if you see big problems every few years, I mean, it makes you scared. And I think that results in such a sense of uncertainty, insecurity among Christians, that this is the major reason why we see millions emigrate to the Western world.
The West has intervened repeatedly in the Arab world. What role do you see, and what do you think the Western world should take in the Middle East?
Build a large wall around it and let them sort out their own problems. Well, that won't work in reality. But I'm a little bit serious. I think the habit of Western countries to intervene is so unhealthy. And I mean, Saddam Hussein, he was the latest victim of it. Well, he was a mean man, but at least he was able to keep some semblance of order in his country. And look at the disasters we have now. And I think most American politicians will cry on their pillow, but never admit that it was better before they invaded than it is now.
So do you see a way that the relationship between Muslims and minority faiths can be improved?
Yeah, but not easy. I think actually Christians in the Middle East and other minorities they can themselves be more assertive and simply say, well, these are our rights legally, so please give them to us. I think they have a tendency to be a little bit too subservient. They don't speak out loud and clear when they should. That gives the Muslim majority a feeling that they're doing fine. Oh, we treat our minority so well. I often hear that. Oh, the Christians in Egypt, they are so happy with how we treat them. They have no clue how unhappy the Christians are. And from the side of Muslims, I do think that they should scratch themselves behind the ears. And well, whether they will ever do that, I hope it happens. I think that in a situation with minorities and majorities, the onus is really on the majority to do something to make sure that the minority feels okay. But in the Arab world, they don't feel responsible. They think that they're entitled as a majority to do what they like, because they are 51%. And as long as they have that sense of power and that feeling about their right to do whatever pleases them, I fear that it will be a while before we see better relations.